changes and at the level of understanding. Now, it is said that in Buddhism, much of the techniques and meditations and teachings for transformation of mind and heart is based upon something that exists out in reality. Because if reality does not accord with your meditative practices, then there is no real ground for expecting any progress and any development. So therefore, it is through cultivating understanding of the nature of reality, and it is through enhancing and developing that understanding, one can then begin to apply the meditative techniques and practices.
Dendegida mögom sa jiang gomli ya mögom sa tan ye do wa sa ko lokshi ma se de lokshi de xie zin gu ya xie zin de lokshi de sa da de yin de sem le gyuju te ya de ge le na xin sem le gyuju te ya sing de gyunze de ba ji yang da ba ji de ne any sem le yi chi ne ba ni ni sem le ya gyuju te ge ma do ji bu ge any xi me de ba ji gyunze yang da me de ba ji any dog be sem le gyuju.
Of course, there are certain types of practices which are specifically adopted to counter specific problems. For example, in the Buddhist meditation, in order to sort of reduce the intensity of one's sexual desire or attachment, there are meditations such as visualizing the entire face of the earth being filled with skeletons and so on. Now, these are specific meditations adopted consciously to deal with specific types of problems. And even in these cases, the meditators do not believe from the depth of their heart that this is reality, this is a picture of reality. There is a full recognition and awareness that this particular image, particular visualization is consciously, deliberately adopted to deal with certain emotions and so on. But generally, in the Buddhist practices, a tremendous emphasis is placed on developing a reasoned conviction in a particular issue, so that on the basis of increasing one's conviction and understanding, then it begins to have an effect on one's heart and mind. So it is through, generally it is through enhancing one's understanding and knowledge and of the reality that the change really takes place. So when we talk about insight and understanding, we are of course talking about insight into the nature of reality and understanding of the nature of reality. That's why this developing understanding of reality is said to be such a crucial element of the whole Buddhist spiritual practice.
Rangxing, da ene dunge mende ba da dewan de ba re de yine da aso dunge manguji yong de ya de ba de ene da nang be chhe na lo ne eno da be di lo yang wo sam chen su ka so re xin ji lo da wa xi se me da wa la da ba xian ba dunge wa la da wa xian ba nan da da me ba la da du xian ba. Shoot, go. The fourth I forget. Oh, Zhang de Dashi. Zhang de Dashi.
So, although we all possess this natural aspiration at a very fundamental level to be happy and overcome suffering, so what we wish and what we seek is happiness. Although this is a natural fact, but it is also a natural fact that constantly and often we face sufferings. We undergo painful experiences and we face sufferings. So from the Buddhist point of view, then the question is asked why this is the case. Why, despite our fundamental aspiration to be happy and overcome suffering, we are constantly confronted with sufferings and painful experiences and misery. From the Buddhist point of view, the reason given is that there are certain fundamentally flawed ways of relating to the world or perceiving the world, at the root of which are what the Buddhists identify as 4 false perceptions. One is to view things and events which are in reality impermanent and transient, but we tend to view them as eternal, we tend to view them as permanent and unchanging. And also, in reality, things and events are in the nature of suffering, in the nature of, they are sources of dissatisfaction, but often we tend to view them as pleasurable, real sources of happiness and so on. So that's the second false perception. And the third false perception is that often we tend to apprehend things which are in reality impure as some kind of pure and desirable. And then the fourth false perception is we tend to project a kind of a notion of real existence, some kind of self-existence to many of the events and things which in reality lack this kind of independent self-existence.
다 근데 이번 인도산에 뭐그 내수를 식네 아니 다 냠는 수 자인도산에 아니 배제 다가다가 자기 시세야디 인사를 삼정기 뒤제ਸਮ지 메다고 사제탐지 동료 최탐지 동시 다메와 양안된다고 시와 세니.
So on the basis of understanding these dynamics of how fundamentally flawed perceptions of reality lead to a certain false view of relating to the world and one's own self, and how this leads to confusion, misery, and suffering, and so on, then Buddhist teachings talk about what are known as the 4 axioms of the Buddhist teachings, these being that all things and events are impermanent and transient, all things and events are impermanent and transient, and all phenomena which are products of contaminated causes and effects are in the nature of suffering, and all phenomena are devoid of self-identity and existence, and the release from the suffering is the true happiness or nirvana, true peace.
두신 책은 깨지마스 두진지 가서 다 두자와 두진 두베 타네 최신 두방 깨바 지 인신제라 아니 미다버란 시리스.
So one of the fundamental insights that we find in Buddhism is the understanding that all things and events are impermanent, and this is the first of the 4 axioms. And here the understanding is that anything or any event that comes into being as a result of aggregation of causes and conditions, by their very nature of being caused by other conditions, by their very nature of being conditioned, in itself indicates that they are impermanent. They are in the ever-changing process. Now, as far as the transient nature of things at the gross level is concerned, we all are aware that how certain things come to cease, how things go through a process of change and so on. But the Buddhists would argue further that underlying this perceptible change that we can all observe, there must be a subtler level of a change, a process that may not be so obvious to us, but that everything is going through this change, even in a single moment. It's momentarily changing. So for something to allow for a change over a period of time, the process of change should be, at least in principle, one should be able to reduce it, narrow it down to a minute point, even within which there is a constant change. That is a dynamic process. So the end sort of insight that is drawn from this is anything that comes into being as a result of other factors, anything that comes into being as a result of causes and conditions, by that very nature makes them impermanent. By that very nature makes them transient.
Tadi 디 상무 스tamp 이나 알아주다 데베